Number 10. Macaulay Billings. Instead of pulling over for police during an attempted traffic stop in Wakefield, England, 26-year-old Macaulay Billings put the pedal to the metal, leading officers on a wrong-way chase up the M1 highway, reaching speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour. Fearing for their lives, his two passengers begged him to either slow down or let them out of the vehicle. Even the police gave up the pursuit after deeming it far too dangerous to continue. Ignoring his passengers' pleas, Billings continued driving the wrong way for 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, before colliding head-on into a BMW. Everyone in the car suffered from life-threatening injuries and lasting physical damage. Macaulay's half-brother's arm was amputated. His front seat passenger, who begged him to stop right up until moments before the crash, was left wheelchair-bound with over a dozen injuries. The driver of the BMW, a musician, sustained physical damage that makes it difficult to play instruments. Billings pleaded guilty to multiple counts of serious injury by dangerous driving and serious injury of driving while disqualified. He was sentenced to 3 years and 7 months in prison and is required to serve half of it before he becomes eligible for release. The judge also banned him from driving for 9 years. Number 9. Young Torturers. A group of young adults trying to make a quick buck broke into the Metairie, Louisiana home of a construction worker in 2022 and held the 40-year-old man and his son hostage for hours. Mistakenly believing the man had a large amount of cash stashed in the house, they demanded an $80,000 ransom. The money didn't come because he didn't have it, but they remained convinced that he did, even after they tried to cut part of his finger off. The suspects decided to let him know they were serious about their demands by kidnapping his son. They told the man that he had a certain amount of time to come up with the money and contact them for directions on where to drop it off. Instead of scrambling to meet the abductors' demands, the victim freed himself and called 911. Sheriff's deputies quickly tracked down the license plate using surveillance footage from a bank where the kidnappers had used the man's ATM card to withdraw cash. In the meantime, investigators had the victim play along with the suspect's plan. He negotiated the ransom down to $15,000 and sent them a photo of the cash. In reality, it was an image of money the sheriff's office had seized in an unrelated case. Law enforcement waited at the agreed-upon meeting location for exchanging the ransom, but when they tried to pull the abductor's SUV over, the driver fled. A lengthy chase ensued, with multiple state and federal agencies joining in the effort. They eventually managed to disable the vehicle. Police learned that the suspects and the victims didn't know each other, but declined to go into detail about who gave them the idea that the victim had a lot of money laying around. 18-year-old Michelle Mayorga, 18-year-old Nielsen Frederick Ruiz, 20-year-old Eduardo Nunez Ponce, and an unnamed fourth suspect were charged with aggravated kidnapping, aggravated burglary, and aggravated flight from an officer. The suspects remain locked up on over $2 million bail each and have been formally indicted in the case. Number 8. Carlos Castaneda. In a disturbing call that came into the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in Florida one night in 2021, a civilian reported witnessing a shooting and seeing the suspected shooters trying to drag the victim's body into a canal. For whatever reason, they changed their minds and put the corpse in the back of a pickup truck. Deputies could see the body in the truck bed when they began chasing after the vehicle. The truck fled, reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour, as it crossed over into Martin County. Numerous squad cars were involved in the 50-mile, 80.5-kilometer chase, as well as several helicopters. Law enforcement attempted to stop the truck using deflation devices called stop sticks, but the vehicle managed to drive around them. They had better success with a tactical maneuver, which involves deliberately hitting a vehicle for the sake of disabling it. After finally stopping the vehicle, deputies took 2 suspects into custody, including the driver, Carlos Castaneda. The dead shooting victim in the back of the truck was identified as 23-year-old Miguel Mejia Granados. During questioning, Castaneda's girlfriend reportedly told investigators that her boyfriend killed Granados because he suspected him of murdering his brother. Castaneda was charged with second-degree murder. Number 7. Clarissa Van Allen. In 2018, police in Newark, New Jersey received a call about a 1999 Honda that was connected with several local hit-and-run accidents. The driver was 27-year-old Clarissa Van Allen, who was driving erratically with what seemed like little regard for traffic laws. Officers tried to pull the vehicle over, but Van Allen hit the gas and sped off. She was going 50 miles per hour, 80.5 kilometers per hour in a 25 mile per hour, 40 kilometer per hour zone, and running through multiple red lights and stop signs. Her reckless driving reportedly forced several drivers to veer out of the way to avoid a head-on collision. The 3-mile-long, 4.8-kilometer pursuit ended when Van Allen crashed into 4 parked cars. According to a statement of facts, the vehicles were all left with extensive damage. Van Allen was arrested on a felony charge of failing to comply with the order or signal of a police officer. Records indicate that she was sentenced to 180 days in jail and fined $1,025. Number 6. Caitlin Rodriguez. 29-year-old Caitlin Rodriguez was apparently so desperate to avoid police custody that she allegedly led officers on a dangerous high-speed car chase with her baby in the back seat. The incident, which happened in 2018, started with an attempted traffic stop, but she had warrants out for her arrest. Rodriguez fled, reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour, while she swerved in and out of traffic, narrowly avoiding several crashes and almost hitting an officer as he laid a spike strip in the road. She lost control of the vehicle after running over the spike strip and crashed into a truck. Determined to put as much space between herself and law enforcement as possible, Rodriguez grabbed the baby carrier holding her infant and ran on foot. Police caught her trying to carjack an SUV and finally apprehended her. She was charged with endangering a child, possession of a controlled substance, and evading arrest. Her baby was taken into the care of Child Protection Services. Number 5. Willie Harris. After receiving a call about a reckless driver, officers in Miami-Dade County, Florida, tried to pull over the vehicle in question. The driver tried running them off the road several times before fleeing the scene. A high-speed chase ensued, with a helicopter tracking the vehicle from overhead. The pursuit ended when the suspect crashed into a bus, causing 4 nearby cars to also crash. 2 people were injured, but everyone thankfully survived. 20-year-old Willie Harris was charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer, fleeing and eluding police, reckless driving causing serious bodily injury, resisting an officer without violence, and marijuana possession. Number 4. Johnny Anshondo. When a police officer in Fullerton, California, tried to pull him over in a routine traffic stop, 33-year-old Johnny Anshondo drove into a nearby apartment complex and fled on foot. He allegedly carjacked a van, then repeatedly backed up into a police cruiser that was trying to block him in. The suspect managed to squeeze back onto the road and led law enforcement on a chase to Whittier, reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour. Anshondo ditched the van and ran into a nearby home, where he snatched a pair of keys and stole the person's truck. The resident attempted to close their gate before he could drive away, but he rammed the truck right through it. For nearly another hour, he continued to elude police, crashing into multiple civilian vehicles along the way and once again reversing forcefully into a cop car. The pursuit ended when Anshondo crashed into a pump outside a gas station. Smoke and flames spewed from the rear of the truck while he engaged in a shootout with officers, refusing to leave the burning vehicle. He finally gave up when law enforcement approached him with ballistic shields and smashed the driver's side window in. Miraculously, nobody was seriously injured during the chase. Anshondo faces 8 felonies, including assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon, 3 counts of vandalism exceeding $400 of damage, theft with a prior conviction of taking a vehicle, carjacking, burglary, and more. He also faces numerous misdemeanors. If convicted on all counts, he could face up to 54 years in prison. Number 3. Terrence Sutton and Andrew Zabavsky. Warehouse worker Jonathan Vladimir Urrutia Chavez was driving in Washington, D.C. with several family members in the car one night in 2020 when a moped emerged from an alleyway and slammed into his vehicle. The moped rider, 20-year-old Karen Hilton Brown, flew into the air and landed on the pavement. He died from a catastrophic brain injury. At the time, Hilton Brown was fleeing from police officers Terrence Sutton and Andrew Zabavsky, who had seen him driving erratically with no helmet on. It's against police policy in D.C. for officers to pursue suspects over traffic violations, leading to charges against Sutton for second-degree murder and conducting a legally reckless chase in violation of policy. Both men are charged with trying to conceal the incident and remain suspended without pay pending the outcome of the case. Prosecutors alleged that the pair downplayed the severity of the accident to their commander. During their trial, Chavez, the man whose vehicle Hilton Brown crashed into, testified that the officers questioned him very briefly at the scene and sent him on his way. Sutton's lawyer argued that his client believed Hilton Brown intended to commit a crime and therefore was obligated under department standards to pull him over. The verdict remains to be seen. Number 2. Erwin Gamboa Gomez and Rodolfo Mendoza Ochoa. After noticing an SUV driving around with its headlights off one night in Pasco, Texas, officers tried to pull the vehicle over, but it sped up. The police backed off the chase until they saw the SUV again a few minutes later and followed it. This time, it was heading toward a local trailer park, where a lot of stolen vehicles had been dumped recently, according to an affidavit. Thinking the SUV might be stolen and that the driver might be planning to dump it in the trailer park, Officer Matt Griffin turned his headlights off and followed it into the trailer park, where he parked his vehicle and waited for it to pass back through. When the SUV drove by again, he turned his headlights on. He heard yelling and then saw a woman rush out of the vehicle and toward his patrol car. She was in hysterics as she explained that two men pulled up to her in the SUV earlier that day. One of them asked her if she remembered him, and she said no. When she started getting visibly nervous and was about to run from the scene, he told her to get in the vehicle or he'd hurt her boyfriend. Whatever plans the men had for the victim were put on hold when Officer Griffin pursued them. They shifted their focus to getting him off their trail, stopping in the trailer park to wait in hopes that he'd find something else to do. Thanks to Griffin's vigilance, the woman saw an opportunity to escape. Police chased after the SUV until the driver lost control of it. They arrested 27-year-old Erwin Gamboa Gomez and 39-year-old Rodolfo Mendoza Ochoa on suspicion of first-degree kidnapping. Number 1. Gene Sulentrop. In early 2021, Kansas Highway Patrol Officer Austin Shepley chased after an SUV going the wrong way outside Topeka in the middle of the night. The vehicle nearly hit numerous cars as it swerved down the highway at speeds of up to 90 miles per hour, 145 kilometers per hour. Shepley eventually disabled the SUV using a tactical move and discovered that the man behind the wheel was Kansas Senate Majority Leader Gene Sulentrop. In an affidavit, Shepley wrote that the politician initially failed to comply with his commands. He described Sulentrop as looking confused and frightened with a blank stare and said that he wasn't registering or responding to the patrolman's commands. Sulentrop reportedly minimized the severity of his actions, incredulously stating, "all for going the wrong way." The 69-year-old called the officer Donut Boy and allegedly told the patrolman he would beat him in a fight while having his blood taken to determine his alcohol content. Shepley wrote that Sulentrop said he played state sports competitively while eyeing the patrolman up and down. His blood alcohol content tested out at more than twice the legal limit, and he was charged with a felony count of eluding police, speeding, DUI, and improperly crossing over on a divided highway. When news of the incident broke, Sulentrop said he was going to step down from his political position. But he didn't, and he also managed to avoid a felony conviction thanks to a plea deal with prosecutors, which saw him plead no contest to reduce charges. Sulentrop was sentenced to 2 days in jail. He announced that he'll be stepping down from his duties in early 2023.
Number 10. Deadly dispute between neighbors. The animosity between Fairfax, Virginia neighbors Michael Hetley and Javon Prather started in 2016 with petty disagreements. Hetley was a former police officer and a NASA executive in his late 40s, and Prather was a young soldier in the Maryland National Guard. Tensions grew over the years as Hetley complained about Prather and his wife Janelle drinking, playing loud music, and arguing. The Prathers got the distinct impression that Hetley was a racist. Hetley complained so much about the Prathers that in 2020, the neighborhood's homeowners association told him that there was nothing more they could do. One morning, he sent the HOA an email warning that the dispute could result in tragedy. In a terrifying scene captured by Hetley's Ring camera later that day, Prather came over to the house at one point and knocked on the door. Hetley answered and immediately opened fire, shooting his neighbor in the abdomen and continuing to shoot as Prather collapsed to the ground and stopped moving. He then pointed the loaded gun at Janelle, who had run over to see what the commotion was all about. Authorities charged Hetley with murder. He argued that he shot Prather in self-defense, but the prosecutor described it as an execution. The jury found Hetley guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 9. Nameless nuisance. A woman was home alone at her downtown Las Vegas home one night in July of 2021 when a man she didn't recognize rang the doorbell. He said that he had a couple of questions. She remained out of sight and didn't respond as he knocked and repeatedly asked, "Are you sure? Are you positive? I just have a few questions for you." The woman's husband, who wasn't home but was watching via the couple's Ring camera, got on the intercom right as the man was turning to walk away and asked him to identify himself. He once again stated that he had some questions, then asked for the girl that's inside the house to come out so he could assault and kill her. When the woman didn't respond, he repeated the threats and said that he had a knife and a gun. He knocked one more time before he finally left. The frightened homeowner filed a police report and posted the alarming footage on social media to raise awareness and in hopes that someone would help law enforcement find the man. It paid off when a local resident recognized the suspect and called the police. When they took him into custody, he refused to divulge his name and referred to himself as the Holy Spirit. He's identified as 40-year-old Christopher Sums in an arrest report obtained by the 8 News Now I-team, which also details how Sums may have noticed the woman through an open window before he approached the door. He was charged with aggravated stalking, coercing with threat of force, attempted burglary, and providing a false statement to an officer. According to the most recent update from August of 2021, Sums was turned over to state-appointed experts for a psychological evaluation to determine if he's competent to stand trial. Number 8. From college to crime. Police in Youngstown, Ohio, rushed to an address on the city's south side in September of 2019 after receiving reports of gunfire. They arrived to find 2 injured victims and a small fire in the kitchen. The home's residents, 33-year-old Jamie Traylor and 27-year-old Clarissa Lucky, were taken to the hospital with multiple gunshot wounds. They told investigators that they heard a knock and one of them answered the door to find a woman standing in front of a man. Without warning, the man shot the resident and the burglars pushed their way into the house. The injured resident played dead, then crawled into their basement. In the meantime, the intruders shot the other resident in the face. Both victims survived with injuries. A few days after the crime, authorities issued warrants for 38-year-old Nicole Taylor and 46-year-old Robert Young, who were seen entering the home in doorbell camera footage. The suspects spent 5 months on the run before turning themselves in early 2020. They both bonded out while awaiting trial, but Young failed to show up for his next court date and has been on the run ever since. He previously served prison time for murder in Michigan, making his current absence especially alarming. Taylor, a former pre-med student who traded her promising future for the life-ruining decision to commit a violent crime, pleaded guilty to aggravated burglary and attempted murder. Her lawyer argued that she didn't realize Young planned to shoot the victims, but under Ohio law, she had a duty to try stopping him and didn't. She's scheduled to be sentenced in December of 2022. Prosecutors are recommending a 15 to 19-year sentence, while her attorney plans to argue for a lesser sentence. Number 7. A homeowner's horror. Around 1 o'clock in the morning on October 28, 2022, two armed intruders entered a home in Kirkland, Washington. They got in through an unlocked door and ambushed a woman who was sleeping on the sofa. Court documents describe how one of the men held a gun to the victim's head, while another pressed the barrel into her chest. Fearing for her life and for the safety of other household members who were asleep, the woman complied with the burglar's demands. She handed over her cell phone, credit cards, and cash. One of the perpetrators ran off while the other stayed behind and brutally assaulted her before leaving the scene. Police uncovered surveillance footage of the suspects, and within hours of the burglary, a SWAT team arrested 23-year-old Boubacar Touré and 19-year-old Mohamed Sassé. According to police documents, the pair admitted to their involvement in the crime. The victim's phone and credit cards were recovered from a vehicle belonging to one of the men. Touré is being held on $750,000 bail, and Sassé's bail is set at $500,000 while they await the next steps in the case. At number 6, cop impersonator's crime spree. A resident in Orem, Utah, allowed a distressed young woman to seek refuge in his home after witnessing a man trying to get her into his vehicle. The man followed. A home surveillance camera captured the suspect, later identified as 44-year-old Oscar Colob Garcia Castorena, repeatedly claiming to be a police officer from the neighboring city of Utah. The homeowner asked Garcia Castorena to leave and told him that he was scaring some kids who were at the house for a party. In response, the suspect threatened to hurt the homeowner multiple times and asked him if he was also scared. An arrest affidavit described how Garcia Castorena was the subject of several suspicious persons reports earlier that day, claiming that he was trying to lure young women into his vehicle. During that same week, police investigated multiple complaints of slashed tires involving 17 vehicles belonging to 12 victims. Once again, surveillance footage connected Garcia Castorena to the crimes. He faces at least a half dozen charges stemming from the crime spree, including DUI, disorderly conduct, giving false information to police, burglary, criminal mischief, and impersonating a police officer. Number 5. Dog-napping delivery driver. Denise Reppenhagen was devastated when her beloved golden retriever Finn disappeared from her Encinitas, California home in 2022. The dog had gotten loose when a family member left the garage door open. Denise searched tirelessly for Finn, contacting community members and animal shelters, and doing anything else she could think of to get the word out. A few weeks later, a neighbor came forward with surveillance footage that showed a package delivery woman putting the dog in her car. Someone recognized the woman in the footage as 36-year-old Dina Vindiola. She allegedly admitted to stealing Finn and told sheriff's deputies that she tried giving the dog to a friend and her mother, but neither of them wanted him. She surrendered Finn to an animal shelter, and he was placed with a foster family while awaiting permanent adoption. After learning that the golden retriever already had a loving forever home, the foster family met up with Denise and Finn was reunited with his family. Oddly, the rescue organization that had Finn in its care had listed his name as Bear on its website based on his microchip information. Alarmed by the discovery, the only explanation Denise can think of is that someone somehow changed Finn's microchip data, but it's unclear how this happened. Vindiola was charged with felony grand theft and 2 misdemeanors. The case is ongoing. Number 4. Video game vendetta. Early one morning in 2019, police in Round Lake Beach, Illinois, responded to reports of shots fired at a neighbor's home. They found 48-year-old Mariana Castro Tellez dead with stab wounds and other injuries. Surveillance footage from nearby homes showed a man fleeing the scene on foot. A relative of the victim identified the suspect as 23-year-old Alonso Campos Jr. and told detectives that Campos had recently pawned a PlayStation 4 to one of the victim's household members. After trying and failing to collect payment for it at least once, he returned with a BB gun and shot Castro Tellez several times before stabbing her to death with a kitchen knife. Campos faces 5 counts of first-degree murder and 2 felony counts of home invasion. If convicted of the murders, he could face up to 60 years in prison. The home invasion charges could carry an additional 30 years. Number 3. The slaying of Jeff German. Staff members at the Las Vegas Review-Journal were shocked when their colleague, 69-year-old veteran reporter Jeff German, was found stabbed to death in his yard in September of 2022. Surveillance footage from nearby homes reportedly showed the suspect approaching German's home, then attacking him right as he opened the gate to his backyard. The video also showed the suspect pulling up to and driving away from the house, according to the Review-Journal. The victim's co-workers at the Review-Journal played an imperative role in cracking the case. After learning of German's murder, they conducted their own investigation. They knew that German had an extensive history of reporting on the seedy underworld of Las Vegas, and that it was certainly possible that someone wanted him dead. But the fact that the murder was carried out in broad daylight, along with evidence found at the scene, indicated that the killer was inexperienced. This essentially ruled out any theory about organized crime or a career criminal being involved. A review of German's past social media posts led the team to identify former Clark County Public Administrator Robert Telles as a possible person of interest. German had conducted an extensive investigation into Telles, and his findings had largely contributed to the loss of the politician's re-election bid. Staff members were sent to drive past his house, where they saw a vehicle matching the SUV seen in the surveillance footage from the day of the murder. Detectives dug deeper and found Telles' DNA at the scene. He was charged with murder and is being held without bail while the case proceeds. Number 2. Fleeing fugitives captured. Surveillance footage captured a blue Honda Civic pulling up to a Newark, New Jersey sidewalk just moments before a young man named Latrell Duncan was shot dead in 2022. In the video, someone wearing a ski mask exits the passenger side of the vehicle and runs away in the direction of the scene where the shooting occurred. He soon returns and the car speeds off. Duncan still had a few years of high school left, yet was considered one of the state's top young basketball prospects. In addition to being a standout player, he was a good student who was well liked among his peers. His aunt, Marcia Douglas, told the New York Times that the shooting occurred shortly after Duncan's high school was let out for the day. Duncan was with a group of friends on the sidewalk when two men confronted them. Words were briefly exchanged, then the parties went their separate ways. Douglas, who heard about what happened from witnesses, said that she didn't know what was said, but that Duncan brushed off the first encounter. He was killed just minutes later. With the help of other surveillance cameras and an automatic license plate reader, investigators tracked the suspects to a home in nearby East Orange, both before and after Duncan's murder. Authorities charged 22-year-old Josiah Wade and an unidentified minor with murder and conspiracy to commit murder, but have yet to reveal a possible motive. A relative of Wade's reportedly told detectives that the young man had lived with her recently and his parents kicked him out of their home. But, she said, he was disrespectful, and she also ended up asking him to leave a few days after the crime. And number 1, the murder of Madison Harris. On the afternoon of February 24, 2020, James Waldick's Ring camera alerted him to some activity going outside his Biloxi, Mississippi home. He opened the app connected to the camera and saw that there was an ambulance outside the house, which he shared with his fiancée and her 16-year-old granddaughter, Madison Harris. Another Ring camera showed a teenage girl entering the house, followed by 4 more teens who stormed in about a half hour later. Their entrance was followed by shooting and screaming. The intruders shot Madison dead. They were easily identified thanks to the Ring footage and were soon charged with capital murder. Waldeck recognized some of the suspects as Madison's friends, but thought back to how the family's home had been burglarized a few weeks earlier. He theorized that the killers shot her as revenge for reporting the burglary to the authorities. The day the teens shot Madison, police believed they originally went there to commit a robbery, while Waldeck suspected that they went there with the intent to murder her. There haven't been any updates since their arrests.
Nine, Tamara Samsonova. A Russian woman named Tamara Samsonova, nicknamed the Granny Ripper, committed an unknown number of murders during a 20-year period from 1995 to 2015. It's believed that she killed at least 13 people before finally falling under legal scrutiny for administering a fatal drug overdose to 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova. Samsonova was working as the victim's live-in caregiver at her St. Petersburg home when an argument over some dirty cups went terribly awry. When questioned by police, Samsonova admitted to mutilating Ulanova's body with a hacksaw while she was still alive. During a search of the home, police found bagged body parts and a diary containing information about some of Samsonova's previous victims, including a former tenant and a local business owner. She was ultimately linked with a dozen unsolved murders in the area and is suspected of having something to do with her husband's disappearance in 2005. His body was never found. Based on the evidence they discovered, detectives concluded that Samsonova most likely had a habit of eating some of her victims' body parts and that she seemed to have a fondness for consuming human lungs. They also found out that she had a fascination with a serial killer known as the Butcher of Rostov, who killed an estimated 50 victims within a 12-year period. According to the most recent updates from late 2015, Samsonova was deemed a danger to society and was institutionalized in a psychiatric facility while awaiting the next steps in her case. However, it's unclear what happened next. 8. Armin Muez. By all outward appearances, Armin Muez lived a normal life as a computer repair technician in Germany. But he had a secret fascination with cannibalism, and in 2001 he took his obsession to a whole new level. He searched for a willing victim who wanted to be eaten, which is apparently just as much of a fetish as the act of eating human flesh. Muez found his match on a now defunct web forum called The Cannibal Cafe, where he posted an advertisement searching for a normally built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. Surprisingly, a lot of people responded to the ad, but a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin named Bernd Jürgen Armando Brandes was the only candidate who didn't back out. The pair met at Muez's home in the small town of Wusterfeld, where Brandes took around 20 sleeping pills. They filmed Muez consensually severing Brandes' privates before they tried to eat the appendage raw. However, it was apparently too chewy for the man, so Muez tried to fry it, but he burned it past the point of being edible. He then cut it up into pieces and fed it to his dog. By then, Brandes was extremely weak from blood loss and the sleeping pills certainly didn't help. Muez drew a bath for the man, leaving him there while he went into another room and read a Star Trek book. After some time, Muez stabbed Brandes to death and stored his body in a freezer. Over the following 10 months, he ate an estimated 44 pounds, 20 kilograms of the man's flesh. Muez was arrested in late 2002 after someone alerted authorities to some new ads he'd posted in search of victims. In 2004, he was convicted of manslaughter and received an 8.5-year prison sentence. Prosecutors appealed the verdict, arguing that Muez deserved to be convicted of murder despite the act being consensual, and in 2005 the case was retried. This time, Muez was found guilty of murder and received a life sentence behind bars. The man has since said that he regrets what he did and that he wants to write an autobiography in hopes of discouraging people with similar desires from following in his footsteps. Interestingly, after going to prison, he became a vegetarian. 7. Mark Latunsky. In late 2019, a Michigan man in his early 50s named Mark Latunsky met 25-year-old Kevin Bacon on a dating app called Grindr. He invited the younger man over to his home in Bennington Township for what one can only assume would be a romantic evening, or perhaps a casual encounter. Unfortunately, Bacon got much more than he bargained for, and it wasn't until he was reported missing that law enforcement and his loved ones learned of his grisly fate. Acting on a tip that Bacon might be at Latunsky's home, Michigan state troopers went to the residence. Latunsky allowed them to come inside, where they found Bacon deceased, naked, and hanging upside down. During questioning, Latunsky allegedly admitted to stabbing Bacon and slitting his throat. He then tied his victim's ankles with rope and suspended him from the ceiling before cutting off and eating certain body parts, including Bacon's privates. Authorities charged Latunsky with open murder, which meant that it was up to the judge to decide whether to convict him of first or second-degree murder. After initially being found incompetent to stand trial, Lutunsky underwent mental health treatment and was later deemed competent. His attorney, Mary Chartier, argued that her client knowingly allowed law enforcement into his home with the victim's body in plain view, demonstrating that he was incapable of measuring the consequences of his actions. She tried to convince the jury that because of this, he did not deserve a first-degree murder conviction. However, the judge overseeing the case disagreed and convicted the man of first-degree murder, describing the killer's actions as a crime of cold calculation. For the brutal slaying of Kevin Bacon, Lutunsky was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 6. Dmitry Luchin. 45-year-old Olga Budanova was 24 years older than her lover, 21-year-old Dmitry Luchin. However, the Russian couple's age difference proved to be the least shocking thing about them. On International Women's Day in 2018, Luchin killed and mutilated Olga, then consumed parts of her body. It all started when Luchin visited Olga's flat in Valdai so they could celebrate the holiday with some drinks. Sometime during the visit, they began to argue, and as a result, Luchin repeatedly smashed a wine bottle over Olga's head, then dismembered her body with a meat cleaver. Using blood from her cracked skull, he drew a so-called sign of the devil on a door in the home. He also roasted the woman's brain and ate it while drinking her blood in what appeared to be a bizarre satanic ritual. Evidence revealed that Luchin had a disturbing fascination with serial killers, particularly Jeffrey Dahmer. He also reportedly admitted during questioning that he derived pleasure from inflicting unspeakable brutality on his victim. Despite his confession, he proclaimed his innocence in court in the form of a bizarre poem he read out loud to the judge. However, Luchin's words were less than persuasive and he was found guilty of murder with special cruelty. In the end, the judge overseeing the case sentenced him to 19 years in a harsh penal colony for his crime. 5. Flesh-eating trio. A Brazilian man in his 50s named Jorge Beltrão Negromonte became known as the real-life Sweeney Todd in 2012 when he was arrested alongside his wife and mistress for killing and eating at least 3 women. Negromonte and his wife, Isabel Perez, along with Bruna Cristina Oliveira, were accused of posting ads for babysitting jobs to lure victims to their house, where the man killed them with a hammer or fish knife. The trio then dismembered the victims' bodies and stored the flesh in their freezer. Then, as part of a bizarre purification ritual, they would consume various pieces. Afterwards, they buried the victims' bones in their backyard. The women used the leftover meat to make traditional pastries, which they sold to unsuspecting buyers on the street who had no idea they were about to consume human flesh. During questioning, Negromonte reportedly excused his crimes by essentially claiming that he was doing society a favor by ridding it of women who would otherwise give birth to future thieves and lowlives. By killing uneducated and disadvantaged women, he felt that he and his accomplices were helping to purify the world, and by eating their victims' flesh, they were cleansing themselves of the sin of murder. Thankfully, all 3 suspects were found guilty of murder and received hefty sentences, ranging from 68 to 71 years in prison. 4. Alison Thompson Weaver. Deputies from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office knew they were about to encounter a serious situation when they responded to a call about someone screaming for help in the early morning hours of September 17, 2019. After entering a 48-year-old woman's Rochester Hills apartment, they found the resident and another middle-aged woman naked and bleeding. However, they had no idea just how bizarre things would get until they questioned the victim and 44-year-old Alison Thompson Weaver, who was found hovering over her friend. Both women were reportedly in a dazed and confused state, and the victim was lying on the floor with bite marks on her face and chunks of her ear and cheek were chewed off. Deputies observed alcohol containers, marijuana, and pill bottles in the kitchen and suspected that Weaver was likely under the influence. The victim said that she'd invited Weaver over for drinks, but was put off when the woman made romantic advances towards her. She wasn't interested in her that way, but wanted to be polite, so she tried to brush the incident off. After going to bed, the victim woke up to Weaver naked and on all fours. She allegedly climbed on top of her victim and began to strangle and bite her while making animal-like movements with her head and teeth. During questioning, Weaver claimed that she and the victim were engaged in a consensual role-playing game. She said that she was pretending to be a wolf and that the victim was a vampire. But the injured party insisted that she was attacked and that Weaver tried to kill her and eat parts of her body. Consequently, Weaver was found guilty and was ordered to serve 10 to 15 years in prison. At her sentencing, she apologized for her actions and said that she wished she could take it back. In her impact statement, the victim likened the experience to a horror movie and said that she didn't think she'd be alive if the neighbor hadn't dialed 911 and law enforcement hadn't shown up when they did. 3. The Cannibal of Pankau. A 43-year-old mechanic named Stefan Trogic looked forward to having an intimate encounter with a 40-year-old schoolteacher known only as Stefan R. The two of them had apparently met on a dating app in 2020. He took a cab to his date's apartment in Berlin's Pankau district, unaware that he had been chosen to fulfill the man's cannibalistic fantasies. During the visit, Stefan R. sedated Trogic before killing and dismembering his body. He then ate certain body parts, including the victim's privates. Trogic's roommates reported him missing several days later, but the first signs of him didn't turn up until nearly 2 months later, when his bones and body parts began to appear near Stefan R.'s apartment building. Police raided the residence and found massive amounts of a cleaning agent called sodium hydroxide, also known as lye. It's believed that the suspect may have used it in an attempt to dissolve any unwanted body parts. In his basement, police discovered traces of blood, along with a collection of knives and saws that they assume Stefan R. used on his victim. For his gruesome actions, he received a life sentence and was convicted of murder and disturbing the peace of the dead. Due to the particularly grave nature of the crime, he won't be eligible for parole after 15 years, which is customary for most serious crimes in Germany. 2. Anthony Morley. Anthony Morley's original claim to fame started in 1993 when he won the first ever Mr. Gay UK contest. He gained further popularity in 1996 when he was a contestant on the dating show God's Gift. However, his fame quickly turned to notoriety in 2008 when he was charged with the murder of Damien Oldfield, who was an audience member during the episode of God's Gift that Morley had starred in 12 years earlier. Authorities accused Morley of inviting Oldfield to his apartment in Leeds, where he killed him. The man then removed a section of his leg and attempted to cook it. Apparently, after the murder, Morley stumbled into a kebab house covered in blood during the early morning hours and asked for someone to call the police. When they arrived, Morley was charged with murder. At his trial, prosecutors accused him of having a verifiable history of being a violent drunk. In a previous incident, Morley had allegedly attacked an ex-boyfriend with a meat cleaver and threatened paramedics with an air rifle. On yet another occasion, he was accused of threatening to kill a man with his bare hands. Prosecutors painted the picture of a young man who developed vicious anger problems because he was confused over his sexuality and whose violent tendencies were exaggerated by his alcohol use. But Morley is one of many people who's experienced similar addiction and confusion, and murder is not a typical response to these struggles. He was ultimately found guilty of Oldfield's murder and received a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years. 1. Rick Gibson. Oddly enough, not all cannibals are killers. Take, for example, Rick Gibson, a Canadian-born artist who committed gag-worthy public acts of human consumption in the name of performance art. In 1988, Gibson ate a canapé of donated human tonsils on Walthamstow High Street in London. While the act generated plenty of controversy, England has no specific laws against cannibalism, so he didn't get in any legal trouble. Less than a year later, he returned to London, where he ate a slice of human testicle on Lewisham High Street without any repercussions. However, Canadian authorities were less tolerant of Gibson's gruesome displays. When he appeared at the Pitt International Galleries in Vancouver on July 14th of 1989, he had plans to eat another slice of human testicle. But this time, police confiscated the disturbing delicacy and charged him with publicly exhibiting a disgusting object. The charge was eventually dropped, and in September of that year, Gibson devoured the hors d'oeuvres on the steps of the Vancouver courthouse. Would you rather only eat meat for an entire year, or only eat vegetables for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.